You're listening to the Ask Drone U podcast. You ask, we answer your drone questions. Whether you're here to turn your passion into profit or you simply fly for fun, we're a community of learners and teachers who aspire to achieve greatness. We are
Drone U.
Hey everyone, and welcome to another awesome episode of Ask Drone U. My name is Paul, and I have the pleasure of having Jon Rupprecht with me. Welcome, Jon.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. It is always a pleasure to have you, sir. And, you add so much value to this. And today we've got a great topic to touch on. And, a lot of FPV racers have been talking to me, Jon, and they're worried that they may have to get a license from the FAA to actually race in FPV events. And recently, as I told you, now the IDRA is actually insisting people have not Part 47, the paper registration route, but the Part 48 online number to actually race their drone in a race. So clear this issue up for us. I know it's, something that a lot of people are thinking about, especially with 107 right around the corner. It's not. But we all want to know. So, Jon, will you break this down for us?
Sure. So for primarily what you're going to be looking at is the two issues here. We have 336 and then we have 107. 336 is the provision that was included in the FAA Modernization Reform Act of 2012, and it was specifically put in there directed at the FAA to protect model aircraft flyers. And what's interesting to note is that as in 2014, the FAA put out an interpretation on that, and its view is that individuals flying recreationally, FPVing, they could not comply with the whole line of sight requirement in 336. Therefore, you cannot currently, as of right now.
So is that because of the goggles? Is that because of the goggles, or?
Well, so the FAA's view of really see and avoid. This is really kind of going back to a bigger issue of 91-113 with see and avoid. They in terms of goggles, devices, and stuff that they put on the aircraft, they don't view that as looking at, using your natural sensors, if you will. And so military pilots have to actually get a COA to do the night vision goggle training exercises and stuff like that. The Black Hawk pilots, they actually have to do that because there is some two big reasons why. You have some focusing view issues because you're not going to have the field of view as you normally would with your regular eyes. And two, since the lights are green on your night vision, that's kind of hard to detect other aircraft, which have then their position lights are red and green. So it's kind of hard when it's green. It's kind of like being colorblind, but with green, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
And so that's why they actually have to get COA. So you've had a long-standing understanding of how that's getting done, and then now you have this FPV setup being brought into it. And so they would view it, I guess, somewhat akin to over the the night vision goggles, because your field of view is restricted, depending on what type of ratio and everything you're using with the FPV setup. So that's the background behind all that. And then as this comes in, they're pretty much saying that see and avoid from 9113 and really the requirements in Section 336, subsection C, I believe it's 2, where it says line of sight. They view it much more as an operational kind of ability of the pilot, not so much as a limitation on the distance from the pilot. I think the proper interpretation of line of sight should be when it says the word within, not constantly maintaining, your eyes on it at all times. Within would be a better way to understand it. And in 107, the NPRM and the discussion of how they were handling FPV racing, they were saying that the within is primarily a distance factor, so as to not allow it go beyond. They could kind of control it. So you could FPV race under 107 in the future, provided that you maintain that distance, whatever it is. But currently, as it stands right now, the view is that FPV racing would not be complying with the provisions in Section 336 or so you're not going to be provided the protections that were directed at that protected class from FAA regulation rulemaking.
So to summarize that, the 336 provision, the modeler's provision that really protects recreational pilots, wouldn't help them. So my understanding of that is that they would have to get a Part 107 license in order to actually fly FPV or fly races. But the next question that I wanted to ask you is, a lot of people are saying, well, you only have to get a 107 if you're a commercial pilot. And a lot of people have been arguing, what is a commercial pilot? But as we had talked earlier on the phone, you said, well, Paul, you've got to be careful here, because 107 is not just for commercial pilots. 107 is for everything but recreational pilots.
Right. It's aircraft, you're either in the recreational Section 333 protected area, or if you're not in there, then you're going to by default fall into a 107 setup. That's kind of how it's being handled now with the 333. So law enforcement, educational institutions, companies flying for free, nonprofits, any of those things, they're non-recreational. They by default are going to fall into like some other thing, which is what? Currently 333s. And in the future, that'll be 107. So that'll be actually beneficial for law enforcement agencies to fly under 107 in the future. Downside to that is 107 does not allow night operations. So that's kind of a big problem there. And there's a few other bigger issues with TFRs and stuff and waivers that could potentially apply later on, but that's a whole nother discussion with public sector stuff.
So let me ask you this question, because you brought up a really good point about another case that I actually want to bring up to you about this case, right? Earlier we were talking about, and will be another episode, I believe, the next episode of the podcast, talking about the enforcement actions, what Motherboard was talking about, including the case in Connecticut where a guy attached a firearm to a drone and flew it around, and now we have another federal case coming down to whether the FAA has authority to get this guy for anything. That being said, one of the things that you had mentioned, Jon, was that he was flying in non-navigable airspace. He was flying between the trees, right? My question is...
correct.
Yeah, my question is, if we have FPV races that are under some sort of canopy, or the canopy of the trees, or between the trees, do you think that the FAA would waiver their authority because it is not navigable airspace?
Well, we shall soon see in that case. That's probably the best way to put it. That's probably the best way to put that, because
Well, what's the thought behind that? Explain the idea of that to everyone, so everyone understands, especially the FPV racers.
Okay, so what's going on down in that case right now is that the FAA issued a subpoena to the father and the son, and they're, if you will, going on a fishing expedition to find out what was going on. Well, in the video, you can clearly see it's in a wooded environment where there's no aircraft flying around, unless you've been watching Return of the Jedi too much.
Which could be the case.
Yeah, and so the defense that the attorney is making for them is that this is completely outside of the Commerce Clause, because at the end of the day, you have to back it, scroll out on these laws. What's the supreme law of the land? Constitution. We have some amendments to the Constitution, okay, and then you have to kind of consider all of that. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution grants Congress the power to regulate interstate commerce, okay? Coupled with the necessary and proper clause, it's a very, very broad setup right there, especially with the Obamacare ruling recently. It's incredibly broad, but you have to kind of think about it. Wait, if this is not in the purview of interstate commerce, Congress really has no authority to really regulate what's going on below the tree line, because there is no interstate commerce with aircraft. Then therefore the FAA does not have jurisdiction, because Congress, which delegated the authority to create rules and regulations governing aircraft, did not actually have authority. So scrolling out, that's one of the big arguments he is making, which will play into this. So most people have been arguing over the definition of aircraft, when in reality there's this other argument that needs to be more fully examined, and that is what is considered interstate commerce and also the navigable airspace, because this isn't really navigable. So does the FAA have jurisdiction to do this? It's the same argument. Does the FAA have jurisdiction over an aircraft flying in a basketball gym? Just because it's something that they regulate doesn't give them jurisdiction. That would be the closest thing. It's maybe a basketball gym with the doors open. Or something.
Well, let me ask that question, because we're seeing a lot of FPV races going indoors because they're saying there is no FAA authority indoors. Is that a bulletproof argument? I mean, we're hearing from you, Jon Rupprecht, aviation attorney. Tell us, what is bulletproof and what is not? FPV racing, whether FAA likes it or not, is moving forward, and is moving forward at such a rate that it's exponential growth. And it's like we've said before, it's a very rebellious, very rogue group of people. In fact, I know maybe 1 in 10 FPV pilots who's ever registered their aircraft. And that being said, can these races go on inside without any FAA, regulatory red tape?
Well, based upon the enabling statutes, the Commerce Clause, navigable airspace, all of that, it would be incredibly difficult for the FAA to assert jurisdiction over you. That would probably be the better way. Now, could they come after you? You can get sued for anything. Will they? I doubt that they would. That doesn't mean they could. So
when they're looking about going after someone, they've got to think to public relations, and can we really spend our time on this, allocating resources and people? So they've got to be weighing out that decision. Am I right or am I wrong? I mean, I feel
right. I mean, it's a stinker of a case if you're going to go into trying to fight somebody that was flying in a bowling alley or something like that. It would be incredibly difficult for you to get jurisdiction over them, because it's not navigable airspace. It's not even in the national airspace system. So what are they trying to actually protect? I mean, if you're going to do that, you could start arguing, jurisdiction over like shooting ranges, for crying out loud, the indoor shooting ranges, because it's an aircraft. It's something that was designed or intended to be flown through the air, and just like a bullet. Okay, so what about indoor golf ranges, baseball batting cages, and stuff like that? I mean, you can get a little nutso with this if you really want to. I just don't think a reasonable attorney inside the FAA, and I do believe there are some reasonable attorneys inside the FAA, they wouldn't waste their time on that unless there was some politically motivated situation that went behind the scenes, where someone from up on high said, "Hey, you take care of this."
Yeah. So let me ask you this: in your opinion, do you think? And obviously, you're not giving legal advice. I just want to throw that in there. Do you think that the FAA will ensure that FPV racers get registered and set up under 107, or do you think this is another battle that we're going to see play out? Because again, we're in that scenario where I feel like the FAA is throwing things against the wall, and seeing what's going to stick. What do you think is going to happen?
They could potentially do that. I mean, is this indoors, outdoors? I mean, if they're
Let's talk outdoors.
They might start. Yeah, they might, because indoors, I really don't see them wasting time on that. That's kind of a fun little argument to make, but it's like no one's going to waste their time, I think, on that unless there's some big political motivation to do so. Behind the scenes, outside, I could see a potential situation developing where you would they might start checking on people to, hey, show me your registration, because under the regulations, you're required to actually turn over that information if requested by FAA or law enforcement to look at that. So they might start cracking down at some point in the future. What will also be really interesting is that it actually requires that you submit to drug testing, since this is an aircraft. And I'm just kind of wondering, they could just get you for that, because I'm wondering how many of these FPV guys are stoners. And
that's a great point. But there are even guys who have cases of PTSD, veterans even PTSD, and a lot of people who I've met who are on drugs that inhibit them, whether prescribed or not, from even getting a pilot's license. And some of these people have very legitimate illnesses and very legitimate reasons to take these drugs. And that being said, with the rise in medical marijuana, it's accepted in 24 states now. There are a lot of veterans who are getting into drones simply because it gives them a way to emotionally experience the air again. Do you think that the drug testing could inhibit not only FPV racers, but other pilots as well that may have very legitimate reasons for the drugs that they're taking?
Well, you have to separate the difference between there's the refusal to submit to drug testing. Then there's also another provision that says if you've actually been convicted of a state, federal statute regarding kind of like a drug related violation. But if you're in a state that has medical marijuana, you're not going to get convicted there. And if you pee in a cup, you're not refusing. So the real big issue at that point, kind of like looking back, is that you're not allowed to fly your aircraft in such a way as you're impaired by some type of drug or alcohol. And what most pilots refer to as the 8-hour bottle to throttle rule. It's the same kind of idea with the stimulant. So if if you're buzzed of some sort, you could potentially be in violation of the of 107 under that point. So you do have a problem if you are a PTSD guy doing marijuana who also likes to do FPV racing. At that point, I'd say my advice to you is like do one or the other. Actually, I'd say just don't forget the medical marijuana. That causes all sorts of issues. Just do FPV racing.
So you just brought up another really good point, right? You said, well, what if someone is on a stimulant, and stimulants are rampant across America's youth and millennial generation. I'm talking things like Adderall, Vyvanse, the ADD medication that, I'm not going to put my position on that. I was once prescribed that. I no longer take it, though. But that being said, what about that group of individuals?
Okay.
Because they would totally test positive in a drug test, let's be honest.
Right, they would, but then are they actually under the influence of those drugs at the time of either violating the regulations 8 hours, okay, or at the time of flight? So there's a potential issue there, and that's really kind of up to them to prove, if you will. I mean, not that you have to prove your defense when you're getting prosecuted, but it's so much cheaper to try to prove it right out the get-go than have to pay an attorney like myself to try to deal with the FAA. I would suggest anybody dealing in that area, that's a bunch of landmines, and that you're playing with fire. And as time goes on, the FAA inspectors could start getting a little bit more inquisitive at that point, because if they can't nail you for some other violation, they might just tell you to pee in a cup just to torque you, because they know there's a high likelihood of drug abuse or something going on with a lot of the FPVers.
Gotcha. All right, last question. Someone had mentioned to me that they want to make sure that I ask you this question. I know we've talked a little bit about the commercial nature of FPV racing, but simply in the fact that anything other than recreational is kind of falling under 107. But someone said, I want to make sure you ask him about the argument of whether flying FPV racing is actually a commercial activity. This is something, again, we talked about just a couple hours ago. And you said, well, it could be gambling. It could not be commercial. It could be commercial because there are guys who could be making money from sponsorship deals and never win. Is that commercial? And then you have guys that win a race and they're making money. And I gave the example of a professional athlete. If someone goes out and plays tennis, they wake surf, they play golf, they play lacrosse, and they go to a regional tournament and they win and they make money, is that commercial? And then you have the very last side of that, which is an unsponsored pilot goes to the race who actually lost money. So, where does the interpretation fall then?
This is a gray area, man. You're going to be leaning more along the lines of that it's most likely compensation until you can get a court to actually prove otherwise, because in saying that it's too attenuated of some sort, because you are going to be deriving a bunch of benefit from the flight, from the sponsorship, from the exposure, but at the same time, you could also be arguing, well, it's not a guaranteed win, so the benefit isn't really guaranteed, like we did a contract or something to go out and shoot a gig. There's a possibility, but not really. It's like gambling. So all those things are going to have to be kind of taken into account, and also weighing just the public benefits of FPV racing for STEM education, stuff like that. So that it hasn't been fully clarified in that area, and I would suggest at this point, if you can't fall into the FAA's incredibly broad classification that it's really direct or indirect benefit, then you should keep that in mind, that they could potentially come after you because it's very broad. No one's really fully challenged them in specificity to the unmanned aircraft FPV racing discussion, not really just like the 333 Parker, all that other stuff, even though Parker kind of does bring it back in, and of the
Well, what about the education
enforcement
aspect? Oh, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you. There's an enforcement action. Sorry.
Well, yeah, no, but that's the problem. What's going on with the enforcement actions is they also they mentioned, at least in, I'm looking here, 5 of the situations they went after people for some type of, they weren't flying their aircraft within line of sight. And 336 subsection B does provide for the FAA to actually go after individuals who are endangering the national airspace. And so FAA would kind of argue that's the equivalent of 9113, that they still have some power to do that. So if you were arguing, doing a commercial, you could be setting yourself up for some potential 9113 A violations that are coming down the pike. This is also problematic because going back over to the educational stuff.
That was my next point, so thank you.
Right. Well, I remembered with the educational setup. Okay, policy memo.
Paint the picture for us. Why could FPV racing fall under the education aspect of drones and potentially save them from all this regulatory, stuff without me being negative or, yeah.
Right. So I would say that the educational memo came out, and that was specifically targeted at 2 groups. So you have accredited educational institutions, not Jim Bob's Hobby Shop doing his thing. But then you have also the ability of community-sponsored kind of based events like Boy Scouts, 4-H, Girl Scouts, stuff like that, where you could go out and fly and do demonstrations for purposes of kind of getting community involvement of some sort. But doing a Jim Bob's Hobby Shop, by the fact of you merely announcing that, you're going to get some benefit and fall out of that category. The educational institutions that are accredited can actually put on they can do some classes, and the professors can teach those classes. But the problem is they have to keep their hands very off the flying. They can do brief incidental kind of very...
Let me interrupt you for a second. Mm-hmm. Does it make sense to you that a professor teaching someone how to fly a drone cannot physically touch the controller of the drone, even though the student of the drone has significantly less experience than the professor? Do you see any issue with that?
Yes.
I'm just clarifying. So for all of you in the FAA and TSB out there, I just wanted you to hear that. So thank you.
Yeah, well, I mean, just to highlight the craziness of the situation. So the memo comes out that these professors can teach these classes and then let their students, if you will, just play test pilot on themselves with the aircraft. I'm thinking the best situation for this is, you're going to be in like a baseball dugout with the chain link fence and like, okay, guys, go, just bam, it's like they're crashing. I'm like, okay, so I'm seeing it's a baseball dugout set up here. Okay, I got that. There's going to be a lot of drones being sold because there's going to be a lot of drones being crashed, which I guess that'll be great for like the follow-up class, which is repairing your broken drones. That'll be class 2 and recalibrating the IMU, because the IMU
class number 3, recovering from class number 1.
Recovering yeah. Oh yeah, exactly. It'll be taking a Phantom and kind of like, we now have to recover the Phantom 2 that is, up in the top of that pine tree over there. So it's going to be a rescue mission. So it's kind of like search and rescue for drones or something.
Pull the thermal out. Pull the thermal out. We're going to teach them search and rescue. All right, a student has to be in control. Take this $20,000 drone. Go ahead.
Then the LiPo battery crashes and catches on fire. You're like, oh, this would be great. Good. Get the flare out. Okay. Yeah, you see that over there? Yeah, here we go. It's white. Real
white hot. We found it.
So there's some problems there, and so they released that. At the same time, I put in for flight instructing exemptions, and we submitted some manuals for those. And all the individuals are commercial pilots at a minimum. We get denied flight instructing on the bottom of the exemptions, FAA just ignored us. Is not answering stuff at the moment, and then they have this memo that they come out letting people just fly. I was just like, wow, the craziness here is where you have all the manned aircraft pilots who know how to operate safely in the national airspace are grounded, and they don't want to lose their pilot's licenses, which in the enforcement actions, one individual, the FAA proposed a suspension of his pilot's license for 90 days. He voluntarily let himself be suspended. There was another guy who had a student pilot certificate who actually gave it up and allowed it voluntarily to be revoked to reduce his penalty from down $2,000. So an individual like myself that has a commercial pilot certificate, I have 2 current flight instructor certificates. I don't want to risk that. So I'm sitting on the sidelines. Meanwhile, professors and their students are in a dugout crashing stuff. And it's just like, wow, this doesn't seem like it's actually promoting safety of any sort. So just kind of like seeing that whole really unfortunate situation going down. But back to education, the FAA referenced 2014 interpretation in there for fault flying in the 336 category. And what comes with that? The whole prohibition on FPV racing. So that's very problematic if you're wanting to do some type of STEM classes or teaching how to do some FPV racing and fly under the 336 setup. So in the future, when 107 comes out, all those students are going to have to go get their 107 certificate to do that. Now, that might be able to be somewhat worked around with the educational institution. Like the first class you get is like drone ground school, at which at the very end your finals take a 107. Class 2 would maybe next semester would be go out and build your FPV racer and learn the mechanics and actually skills of flying. They might do it like that, but it is problematic if you're trying to do it outside of on a quicker timeline, because now you have to always have 107 preceding it, and it's a 2-person operation when 107 comes out.
Yeah. Wow. Well, Jon Rupprecht, thank you so much, aviation attorney, for clearing things up for us. As the waters continue to get muddier here in the airspace of the FAA. I mean, that made no sense, but guess what? Nothing does when it comes to drones.
Hey, are you under the influence?
No, I'm just trying to wrap my...
Yours.
No, I'm just trying to use the same rationale, John. I'm just trying to set everything up the same way. Air, water, they're the same thing, whatever. Anyway, yeah. No, I really appreciate having you on. Thank you so much for clearing the air. Hopefully we'll figure out what the FAA does with FPV racing, because it is growing so much. And at what point is Congress, the Senate, our government officials going to say the FAA is getting in the way of significant economic growth? We now know it's in the billions. Get out of the way. I mean, I don't know what else to say, but I'm very interested. Our state senators here in New Mexico and in Colorado are adamantly staying on top of this. So I'm very happy about that. But we'd like to see more pressure. We obviously all want the same thing here. I mean, that's what I find funny is that we've got the FAA at one side of the table, FPV racers, drone pilots, commercial airline pilots, and we're all saying, look, we just want very clear, simple rules to allow your drone not to hit my aircraft. I want to fly the same way. We need to allow drones to, be easily, an easy barrier to entry into the commercial market. Same thing with FPV racers and recreational guys. So I feel like we all kind of want the same thing. We're just nitpicking at each other for all the little nuances and terms. And again, I feel like the FAA is kind of the guy on the outside of the table saying, we're just going to let everything clash and hit each other and break stuff, and then see how we should write the rules so that we don't break stuff again. Again, it's that whole let's let the courts figure it out ideology.
Yeah. There's so much to be said about all of that.
Yeah, I agree. Well,
More
John, thank you. Yeah, and you know what? We're gonna have you on another podcast. So, John, thank you so much. If we wanted to find out more information about you, if we wanted to get a hold of you, because maybe we got a call from the FAA, or maybe we want a 333, or there are 100 different reasons to call you. Where can we go to find out more information on you?
Sure, you can go to my website at www.jrupprechtlaw.com. That's spelled JRUPPRECHTLAW.com. You can also check out my Twitter at @RupprechtLaw. And make sure to sign up for my newsletter at my website. So when I regularly put out these blog posts, I include that in the newsletter.
Awesome. Well, Jon, thank you so much. And guys, thank you for listening to this awesome episode. This was episode 364, and we're going to have Jon on again, and we're going to talk about these enforcement actions that we met up with Motherboard and discussed with them. So, Jon, thank you again so much. That's going to do it for us today. You're listening to Ask Drone U.
We believe that videos, images, words, and sounds have the absolute power to inform, inspire, and entertain. We reject indecision, confusion, and vanity, for they work against the community. We are united under the virtues of safety and knowledge. We are a training community of learners and teachers who encourage and energize each other to achieve greatness. We are pilots, videographers, photographers, freelancers, business owners, enthusiasts, experts, and apprentices. We are creators. We are the Drone U.